In the darkness, it was 2 a.m. I was tired and beat from work. I looked at my bed and wanted to put my head down, but I couldn't yet. A large sigh erupted from me as I walked to the kitchen and made my food. I decided on some bulldog and mayo for a quick, easy meal. After cleaning up and putting my dishes in the sink, I wandered back to my room and flipped onto the bed without kicking off my shoes or changing. As my head touched the pillow, I was out. I felt something was off and bolted awake. It was pitch black. I noticed I was not in my room, and wherever I was, it was not home. I stood up thankful I fell asleep with my shoes on. I blinked and took a breath. Wherever I was, there was no light, and it was cold and wet. A shiver ran up my spine and panic. I started to grope for a wall and get my bearings. I finally found a wall and got a sigh of relief. I planted my hand on it and started to walk. As I traced the wall, a small flicker of light started towards me. I wanted to scream for help but decided to stay quiet. Could this be the person who took me? Was I taken? If I scream, will they chase me down? Fear as my hair started to stand on end. A booming voice yelled at me. Are you lost? Fear, cold sweats, and a panic attack. Do I answer? Should I stay quiet? What do I do? I make up my mind and tail back, but I don't know. I don't even know where I am. As I yelled, the light ran at me. Frozen to the spot. Unable to move, it was in front of me within seconds. I could see what was holding the light, and it was terrible. A large creature with a mouth filled with needle teeth. No eyes, stood about 7 feet tall. The blood drained from my face. Screaming and stayed silent, the creature spoke. Well, now you are new. Oh, you must be terrified, as it touched its low row of teeth almost as holding its chin in thought. He spoke again. We will miss you in the world of darkness. Those that fall down here all take a shape that is most terrifying. Only way to see a person for who they are is to find your light. Be glad I found you first, because there are real monsters down here, and without your light, you will never know who is friend or foe. It is strange though. You don't seem to be taking a form of a monster without that light. Strange. Very strange. We will miss if you will follow me. I can take you to where you can find your light. Without an answer, the creature started to walk away. Not knowing if it was safe, I chose to walk a few paces behind the creature. Don't know if it would do me any good with how fast they moved. I was on high alert during our walk. Small lights popped up, then would fade out of the view. Questions swimming in my head, but I didn't take a shape or form. What is this light? Is this a trap? Lost in thought, I didn't notice that the creature froze, and I walked right into the back of it, falling to the ground. A granite sheet don't move. I stopped from getting up and held my breath. Before I knew it, I was picked up like a feather, and he started running with me. As I was held close, the creature's image faded. It was a man with black hair, blue eyes, and was actually not that tall but athletic. As the light was pressed between us, I could see the fear on his face. He was not lying, and now I was glad I was found by him instead of whatever was chasing us now. He looked down at my face, noticing I could see him and not his form. Surprise crossed his face. As he dodged around a corner, we skidded to a stop near a cove and ducked in. It was tight fit. He was breathing hard and still holding me like a sack of potatoes. Something is not right. How can you not have a form and see me without a light? That makes no sense. What are you? I stammered. I'm just a regular human. I got off work, I laid in bed and then woke up here. What else do you want from me? I'm scared. You told me I entered the darkness, and I am seeing monsters who could probably not be monsters. I saw you as one, and now you are a man. What the fuck do you think? I don't have a damn clue. Apparently I need this light. I'm freaking out. And you pick me up like a sack of potatoes and run. And I have no clue what is chasing us. I'm yelling and shaking in his arms. He turns pale, trying to shush me. Then I see it, a beast running to the cave we're in, smashing against its claws, ripping and tearing through the cave. It is too large to enter. He starts to push down the cave with me pushed against him as he desperately tries to squeeze us down further. I feel it, the claws are like razor blades. It cuts my shoulder and a back. I hear a gasp escape me. It hurts as blood spills down. He looks at me, fear and panic. His heart as well. This large beast is like a cat at a mouse hold. It's got feathers around its neck, needle teeth. It's like a feathered cat with glowing blood eyes. It mostly has feathers around its ankles and neck and tufts on its ears. It is ungodly ugly. The sounds it makes are bone-chilling. We are pressed together, bleeding as the claws reach and scratches at us. I finally get leverage and almost scream as I push myself out of his arms and grab him by his shirt and pull us forward. We get further out of reach. It is small, but I am small, so I crouch down and start to cry and beg, why did I do? He looks at me and slides down the wall next to me. He hurt bad. You get hurt, he says to me. I look at him and say, well, you are as well as. Please explain what's going on. He sighed. Okay, the darkness is where people are sent for trial. Lost souls, coma patients. They're held for accountability, or they are here because they have fallen through. People take on the form closest to their sins. Each person has their own light and many wander the darkness. Those who are here and never make it through become those monsters because they give up. You seem to take no form, see us, without of the light. I don't think you belong here. I don't think I belong either. If you have a form, your form looked like a giant walking lich before I could see you. You terrified me. So if people take the closest form to their sins, would that mean you took what didn't belong to you? He looked down. He spoke, I am ashamed. Yes, I took and caused misery on those around me because of my addiction. It caused me to fall into a coma. Well, I started helping others like me find their light. I'm ashamed of my actions while I was living and I take accountability for what I did. I have my light, but I don't feel like I deserve freedom because of pain and misery I caused. I looked at him. I started to rip my shirt and make a wrap for his arm. He stared and went to stop me, but as he reached, I took his arm and wrapped his arm up. I don't think you should stay here. You seem to be truly sorry, and you helped me not knowing if I was going to be evil or harm you. You protected me and got hurt for me. And that monster is the monster, through and through. They deserve to be here cause, from what I can tell, is they were a predator in life and always will be, and they enjoyed making us suffer. I don't know if I have a sin. I have always tried to be kind and compassionate to everyone. My biggest weakness is that I care too much and let people take advantage, and some days wonder if I even deserve to live. I struggle every day. He looked at my wounds and looked at his bandaged arm, his eyes downcast looking at the ground. As he began to speak, a clicking and scattering noise started to come down to the cave. He froze shooting upright, grabbing me by the hand and pulling me down the hallway. I looked back and saw a humanoid centipede gripping the wall and moving swiftly to us. As we squeezed and moved as fast as we could, we finally popped out of the cave into a bigger space. I saw a child crying, holding a teddy bear, crying for their mother, begging them to save them. Without thinking, I shook my hand free, darting to the child, picking them up, and then continued to run. He looked at me as if I had done something horrible. We finally found a place and hid. The child was quiet in my arms. He was about to start yelling. Then the child looked up at me. I could see they were scared, but as they looked at me, a smile crossed their face. The child whispered and said, "Thank you." As I hugged them tight, they started to fade. He stood frozen as I hugged the child again, wishing them safety and peace. He glared at me. "What were you thinking?" He screamed at me. I babbled while they were crying for their mom, and I couldn't run knowing that creature would have hurt them. It was just an instinct to protect them, and I didn't know. He looked stunned. "That was a child you grabbed." I didn't see it as a child, it looked like a statue. You really can't see us. You just set a lost child free. I'm sorry for yelling. He saw my wounds were worse. He started to tear. Cloth stripes from his shirt, he bandaged my arm. He was lost on how to care for the one off my back. I smiled at him. He was frustrated. I touched his hand and said, "You need to move on. You can't stay here forever. You have atoned for what you have told me." I gave him a hug and said, "Please move forward." He started to fade, tears in his eyes. "What about you? Well, come find me in the waking world when you wake up and see." I sat there alone. As all the monsters started closing, I sat there smiling. At least I could get those who deserved to be free out. Tears swelled up in my eyes. I am all alone again in the darkness with the monsters, as they longed for me. I could hear an alarm going off. I stood up feeling more exhausted and in pain. I look at my arm and there is a cloth bandage. There is blood on my bed and I am filthy. My back screams at me. I looked around and see that I am at home. I drag myself to my alarm and turn it off. I go to the bathroom and look at myself. Was it a dream? I question. I look at the bandage I owns. I put it to the side and get into the shower. As I wash, my doorbell rings. I grab a towel. Rushing to the door, I nearly trip and slam face first into the door. I open the door to see the man from my dream or not dream. "Well, looks like I found you," he chuckles. He looks at me and sees I have wounds, and me holding the bandage from the dream. He turns pale. "That's not possible. You can't physically enter the darkness. You shouldn't have anything from the darkness when you come back." I stood frozen and scared. Had I really fallen out of reality, and would I be dead now if I had not somehow slipped back to the reality? Diana had normal sleep paralysis until she started moving. The worst kind of monsters are the ones that you don't recognize at first. For some folks, monsters are closer than they may think, shrouded in the darkness, waiting for the opportunity to strike. For a lucky few, they are protected from monsters by their loved ones and allowed to grow and succeed. Such was the case with Diana and Adam, a couple from Buchanan, West Virginia. They weren't exactly the spitting image of love. They argued sometimes, worked opposite shifts, and didn't go out on dates that often. But they were married, and that's a lot further than most couples make it. Diana was the social butterfly of the pair, dozens of friends, good relationships with people all around town, and a reputation for always carrying a sincere smile on her face and a helping hand for anyone who needed it. At first glance, you'd think that she was the only who grew up there, not Adam, but that wasn't the case. After all, they were living in Adam's childhood home, gifted to them by his parents as a wedding gift. Adam was somewhat of a recluse. He had fine social skills, but worked the graveyard shifts and never left the house much other than that. People would sometimes shoot the two glances when they were rarely sighted together. The old saying, "opposites attract," might be true after all. While they were indeed opposites, and they didn't show it often, they did love each other and protected each other from the monsters of the world. Not that there were many to defend from in their sleepy little town. There hadn't been anything more than petty crime since the early 1960s. They had been living in their home for around 3 years, and for Diana it was just starting to feel like a home. When they first moved in, the place had a somber atmosphere. There was no light from street lamps peeking in through the blinds, eager to dance on her velvety skin on dark nights. There was no honks of cars outside, or faint music from a party in the distance. The environment was entirely different from the city she was raised in, and it took her a while to not hate it. After making friends with people around Buchanan, though her relationship with the place began to heal, she wasn't suddenly head over heels for it, but she understood as staging area for the true meaning of home, the people she surrounded herself with. Adam was accustomed to the place immediately, having lived there for years, and didn't exactly enjoy the constant slew of company that Diana had parading through their halls. After all, he was dead tired, come snap, and just wanted peace and quiet when he got home. He would often disregard visitors in his living room, offering a simple nod and slight smile as he climbed the old cricket stairs to go to bed. This didn't exactly faint him, nor the couple well. Why was Diana married to this antisocial oddity who didn't even seem to want people in his house at all? While their lifestyles didn't exactly line up, they still tried to take each other's need into consideration. Diana would usually go over to others' houses if she wasn't working and wanted to spend time with her friends. If she did some company over, she tried to keep the volume to a minimum, which isn't exactly difficult with simple conversation and a coffee. Conversely, Adam would carefully traverse the house at night to ready himself for the day work, as it allowed for with its age. He loved her enough to let her sleep, and she loved him enough to do the same. It was on a rare night where Adam didn't have work that the couple go to bed together. The crisp autumn night let them leave the windows open to be awakened by the sounds of the birds outside. They shared a rare kiss and rolled onto opposite sides of the bed to hopefully get a full night of sleep. But they didn't have anything to do tomorrow. After all, Diana's eyelids shuttered open to a mostly dark room, only pierced by a rare spot of lighting shining through the open window. Weird, she thought, rarely did the moonlight penetrate the tree line, although it may have been easier now, with the brown leaves crumpling off the maple trees. Despite this oddity, everything else appeared normal. It was still dead silent, save for the distant crickets creeping in the woods. What had awakened her? She tried to sit up, if nothing else to retrieve a glass of water. However, she could not. Her eyes widened as her heart began to race. She didn't know what was happening, but she didn't like it. The only part of her that could move were emerald eyes, darting across the room and looking for anything that might be causing this, or anything she could use to snap herself out of it. And then it stepped into the light. Upon seeing it, she wanted to scream loud enough to reduce every window in the house to sound, but she couldn't. Her lungs seemed to be one of the only organs that worked, but as she kept breathing, despite the fact that she didn't work to risk making noise, her heart also worked. Evidently, it was beating so fast that she thought it might give out. Standing in front of her was a man, or what looked like one. It was around 7 feet tall and had mostly human features, apart from a few things that were strictly impossible for any living person to have. Its right arm was completely gone. The right half of its face was that an expressionless young man. The right, simply a rim of burned flesh and muscle surrounding its skull. Its feet were missing their skin completely, although they were intact enough for it to stand. But this was it, she thought. I'm going to die here in this bed, and my husband is going to find me when he wakes up. She didn't have a choice but to wait for the girl to approach her and rip her to the shreds, or do who knows what else. But as the seconds turned into minutes, the being stayed still. Its expression remained neutral, no murderous glee, anger, or even sadness. It didn't seem to want to harm her, or at least she hoped. Suddenly, the window slammed shut, and she blinked for the first time since she woke up. The figure was gone, and the window was indeed sealed, rendering the room completely silent. Her husband stared next to her and peered over at as she sat there, hyperventilating, having finally regained control of her motor functions. Rather than offering comfort, though, he simply rolled back over. He had stayed up all of last night and day so they could go to the bed together, and nothing was going to stop him over-resting, not even his clearly distraught wife. Even though she wanted to, he didn't mention it over breakfast the next day. She was afraid of many things. She was scared that Adam wouldn't believe her and would ridicule her or take the experience as yet another jab towards his childhood home. She was afraid she was losing her mind and didn't want to think about it. She just had to pray that it wouldn't happen again, and spent her day looking over her shoulder. An accident at the factory the next evening abruptly granted Adam the night off, and they spent it watching an old romantic comedy in the living room. Diana wasn't feeling very romantic. However, every single crack of a twig from what was probably just deer outside nearly sent her into a panic attack. Whatever that thing was, she didn't want to see it again. She even prayed for the first time in years, simply to request that whatever foul spirit haunted her nightmares be vanished. She drifted off to sleep with it as a slight of comfort. All comfort shattered immediately when she woke up in the darkness again. The being spared no time to hide in the shadows this time. Diana immediately saw it, staring out the window. It turned its head towards her and she internally grimaced. Its face was just as unsettling a sight as it was the previous night. This time, though, something about it was different. It had actual emotion on what remained on its face, even if just slightly. She saw a dull sadness, perhaps with a taste of bitterness, but she couldn't see quite that much detail. All she knew was that whatever it was, it looked like it was hurting. It suddenly raised its arm and she felt a wave of cold air pass over her. She blinked, but it didn't disappear. It stood almost as if it was waiting for her to move towards it. To her surprise, she cautiously lifted her torso up into the bed and moved the covers off her legs, never taking her eyes off of it. Once she was out of the bed, she stood and looked at each other, as if in a game of cat and mouse for who would move first. Ultimately, Diana won that competition, and the being turned and walked towards the bedroom's door frame. It stopped merry feet from it and turned its head back towards her, and waiting for her. Everything inside of her, from her past experiences to basic survival instinct, was screaming at her not to follow it. But she somehow knew that it wasn't going to harm her. She didn't necessarily feel safe around it, but something compelled her to follow it, and so she did. She followed it down the stairs and down another set into the boiler room. It led her towards the corner of the basement and then turned around. She began looking around the room, searching for what this may have led her to. She tried to speak but found herself unable to speak. The light coming through the window slightly shifted, and she saw a handle on the wall that matched the color of the paint surrounding it. It was a crawl space door, partially blocked by boxes and paint cans, but just barely visible. The being motioned for her to open it. She had already made a stupid decision by following it down here, she reasoned. Why should she enter a dank crawl space? This brief moment of logic and reason was quickly overridden by another voice within her head, of her still but bearing different reasoning. If it wanted to kill me, wouldn't it have done so already? She thought, and this was enough to get her to move the boxes, shift the paint cans aside, and try the door handle. It didn't budge at first, as it was apparently sealed. After a few more violent tugs and the serving of the rubber seal surrounding the door, it violently swung open. Immediately a foul smell permeated through the cold air, and she immediately began profusely gagging. It was a smell more horrible than anything she had ever had the misfortune of experiencing. Worse than sewage and spoiled food. It was a smell of rot. The being was unfazed by this, and again motioned for her to go through the door, with a point from a finger that was barely attached to its decaying hand. Despite the fact that she had moments before been rolling on the ground, trying not to vomit, she again felt compelled to listen to the figure. She made her way through the tight tunnel, scraping her knees against the oddly brown-stained concrete, until she found herself in a room big enough that she could stand up. She fumbled around for a light switch and didn't find anyone. Regardless, the single light bulb hanging from the ceiling flicked on, and when the room lit up, she couldn't hold back the sickness anymore. She vomited all over the floor before collapsing against the wall, sobbing. She was still unable to speak or scream, despite her best efforts. Inside the room were no less than 20 corpses, all staked in a heap in the corner. Some were almost skeletal, which some appeared fresh. Lining the walls were dozens of instruments of torture, some foreign, some disturbingly familiar. She could not believe what she was seeing, a cell of death hiding beneath her home for who knows how long. The light flickered, and the being appeared in the center of the room. In the light, she could see more of its hideous features, a slit throat, missing fingers, missing teeth from the protruding skull. It calmly walked towards her as she sobbed, preparing to join the pile, but it did not touch her anymore. It stood over her as she opened her eyes again and extended its decomposing hand to her. She was baffled, to say the least. Why did this thing bring her down here? Was it the one reasonable for this? If not, then who did this? question raced through her overwhelmed mind as she raised her head to look at it once again. As they looked at each other, she suddenly understood, and all of the questions were answered. She took its hand and rose to her feet. It looked at her for a few more seconds, and the light flickered again, and it was gone. The next morning, Diana made breakfast in the kitchen, shaking with anticipation for when her husband would awaken. She did not get an ounce of sleep after what had happened. She spent the night cleaning her vomit from the floor and sealing the door with superglue. She was so lost in thought, thinking about what had happened, that when a hand was placed on her shoulder, she nearly jumped out of her skin. Adam spun her around and pinned her against the stove. He firmly asked what she was doing in the basement last night. How did he know? Diana wasn't sure, but she quickly lied about going downstairs to change the temperature on the thermostat. His grip on her shoulders eased up a bit, and she exhaled in relief before he raised his voice. She looked at him, shocked, as he yelled at her to never go down there without him again. He turned and left the kitchen and the house, slamming the front door as he left. The next few weeks were uneasy. Diana walked on eggshells around Adam, who refused to even look at her. She didn't know if he had anything to do with what she found, but she didn't want to believe it. Even so, his family had owned the house since it was built. Who else could it have been? She tried not to think about it, and didn't even see friends anymore, in fear that she would accidentally reveal her secret. Even on nights where he was off work, they did not sleep together. She took the spare bedroom and locked the door. She didn't get good sleep, but she slept through the night. One night she woke up in the pitch black once again. The being needed no introduction, standing by her bedside and waiting for her to awaken. It began walking towards the door again, and she followed without hesitation this time. Whatever it had to show her, she was ready to see it. She found herself in the basement once again, as it simply stood there and looked at her. She couldn't say anything to it, which was fine. She didn't have anything to say. Suddenly, the door to the basement flew open. The lights flicked on, and Adam flew down the stairs, angrier than she had ever seen him. As she tried to back up against the wall, he grabbed her arm and began screaming at her. As she yelled in her face, she had a choice to make, and she chose to push him away. He stumbled backwards to the edge of the shadows of the basement's darkest corners, and in an instant, a rotting hand grabbed him and violently yanked him into the darkness. The lights cut out as shrieks and squeals echoed from the corner. Just as suddenly as they started, though, they stopped. She stood there, completely emotionless, in the pitch dark. The basement was entirely silent, as was the outside world. The crickets were quiet. There was no wind, and the radiator had stopped humming. The moonlight streaming into the room illuminated only the floor, where a pool of crimson blood slowly grew larger. Out of the shadows stepped the being, its wet, skinned feet slapping against the concrete. It did not move towards her, it just stared. Then out of the one eye it still had, it began to cry. It did not make noise, but teardrops rolled down its cheeks, and the sound of them falling off its face and into the puddle of blood became the only noise in the room. At that moment, she finally understood. The light flicked back on, and it disappeared. She looked into the corner where her husband was dragged and found nothing. She ascended the stairs, still in her nightgown and slippers, and opened the front door, shutting it behind her as she left.